Hello, good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. I'm in this dangerous slot in the morning after a long weekend, and everybody's like, So we're gonna push into this, which I think is an important thing. There's a quote from St. John Paul II. You can't see it right now, but I'll read it. From the beginning of Christ's mission, women show to him and to his mystery a special sensitivity which is characteristic of their femininity. It must also be said that this is especially confirmed in the Paschal mystery, not only at the cross, but also at the dawn of the resurrection. Right? And so we're going to speak into that, right? The beauty and the strength of that. And I want to speak about the beauty and the strength of the sensitive heart, because I think often it's misunderstood. And there's a unique gift, I think, that the feminine heart has in that. It's not purely feminine, because Jesus, his heart himself, would be very sensitive. But there's a special way that the feminine heart reflects the sensitive heart of Jesus, I would say better than men. And it's funny sometimes, there's a mistaken notion about sensitivity. And I think sometimes we do a disfavor to ourselves, right? Because I've heard it before numerous times in my life where people will say things like, oh, just stop being so sensitive, right? And sometimes it's like, okay, I'll stop being me, right? Because that's easy to do, right? I'll just turn it off. But yet sometimes that's exactly what happens. People turn it off. They shut it down. They see it as actually a weakness. But I'm here to say that it's not a weakness, it's a strength and it's a gift, right? But it needs to be understood and channeled in the right way for the Lord, right? And so having a sensitive heart, it's important to know this, is not a weak heart, right? Jesus' heart was, the sacred heart of Jesus was incredibly sensitive, right? When Jesus is riding into Jerusalem and he just starts weeping, right? My people, how many times did I call to you? And I wanted to shelter you and save you, but you wouldn't hear me. Like he's weeping just over his people. Why wouldn't they hear me, right? And I myself always had a very sensitive heart, but as a man in particular, when you have a sensitive heart, right, that's definitely not seen as a good thing, right? Growing up in the world with the lads, right? So what do you do with that? You kill it, right? You shoot it, you kill it, you bury it, right? And that's what I did. That's what I did in my life, right? And I remember one time I just want to share a couple of stories and then how that applies for my own life and how I think that applies to the beauty of your hearts and the strength of your sensitive hearts and how we can use that for God and for the kingdom and become more fully who we're called to be, right? I was praying one time and I said, Jesus, I want to know your heart more. I want to experience it more. I want to feel it more, right? I want to know your heart, Lord. And I felt Jesus to say, okay. It was almost like, you asked for it, you know. And Jesus has showed me this vision of himself. And I'll never forget it. It was so intense and so beautiful. It was Jesus just showed me himself on the cross, right? And it was just this look in his eyes of such sadness, right? And I knew the sadness was coming from like the pain that Jesus suffered on the cross. And I believe that when he said, Father, let this cup pass from me, it's not because he didn't want to be crucified. He chose that in love. Yes, it was going to be incredibly intense and painful, but the interior pain was so much more. Why is that? Because Jesus knew despite his sacrifice on the cross, despite his pouring out all of his blood, despite his dying for us, that many of his children would say, screw you, I don't want you in my life. get out, right? He would be rejected. And as he's hanging there, bleeding, dying for his people, he just has that before his eyes. So many of his children saying, get out of my life, go away, I reject you. And that they would be lost forever. So the pain that he's feeling is that moment of like, no matter what I do, I'm going to lose so many of them. And I can't take it. It's too much. I can't take it. And I think that's what he was crying out to his father with when he said, Father, is there any other way we can do this? Is there any way that we can save them all? I don't want to lose a single one, right? Because, with a parent who loses a child, when my brother lost his son, it destroyed his life, right? My oldest nephew. And it was just, for me, it was the most gut-wrenching, heart-rending experience of my life. I remember when I got the news, I wailed, and just wailed and sobbed and just uncontrollably, all right? And so you think about that, and then you think Jesus' love is so much more for each one of us, right? And so he has this love. And so each one of his children that's lost for eternity in hell, the heart-rending that it causes to him. But yet, we have to be created with freedom, because we can't love if we don't have freedom, right? We've spoken about that. So we had to have freedom. So Jesus is there on the cross, and he's just looking at me, and I just see this profound, deep sadness in his eyes. And then he says to me, how many of my children are abandoning me now, walking away? And we all know it. We could all just talk about our families, right? How many of my children, and Jesus says, are walking away from me, abandoning me now? They're abandoning me, they're walking away. And it was just this look of intense, profound sadness. And then Jesus said, and he just looked at me with those eyes, and he said, will you leave me too? Will you abandon me? And I just remembered the foot of the cross, right? Where all of his disciples, all of his first priests, where other than John, right? Where were they? They were gone. And I just said, no, Lord, no, I will never abandon you. I'll never leave you. And he just looked at me and he said, okay. And with his pierced hand, just went like this. And he said, then you're going to come join me on the cross, right? Then you'll come join me on the cross. I was like, all right. And this is God's invitation to us, and this is part of the gift of the sensitive heart. It's an entering into the heart of Jesus, that pierced heart, right? And it's a suffering with, that's what compassion is, a suffering with Jesus, right? And so Jesus invited me into that. And honestly, and in that moment he was saying, if you want to enter into my heart and feel my heart more clearly, here it is. And he gave me like just a taste of how he sees others, right? And how he feels for us and the pain that he feels. And I remember just thinking like, I literally started like hyperventilating and weeping. I was like, Lord, that's so much. And it was just like the slightest little particle of entering into his heart. And I said, Lord, I don't know if I can do that. And honestly, I was terrified. And part of me wanted to pull back from it, right? And I said, why? What's blocking me? What's hindering me from entering into that? And part of it was because of, I knew entering into his heart, I would be weeping a lot, right? Because I would start to feel his love, his compassion, his sorrow, his pain, right? And part of me was saying, no, I don't want that. Why was that? Because I was worried about what other people would think about me, all right? If I go around weeping all the time, especially because, like people look at me and say, oh, he's a big tough guy, He's a big tough guy that cries like a baby all the time. And I couldn't harmonize the two. And I walked away from it. I wouldn't enter in. And this was like this constant tug of war, this desire to enter in, and this fear. It was actually a fear, right? And I was like, and the fear, and I finally went on this inner healing retreat, and he's like, what's the problem? I was like, what's the fear? I was like, well, then I'll be weak and vulnerable. And the guy that was praying with me was like, and I'm like, and that sounds terrifying and terrible. I don't want that. And he said, but that's the heart of Jesus, And I said, I know. And it just kind of flashed. What happened was I went back to, where did this start, right? And again, I went back to my childhood, right? When I was this incredibly sensitive little child, right? And I just found beauty in the simplest things. And I would just think, wow, this is so beautiful. Now, if you're with your guy friends and you're a little boy and you're like, oh, isn't this beautiful? It doesn't always go so well, right? And so I started to think, well, there's something wrong with me then. There's something, I gotta deal with that, right? And so many images came back to me. I remember one image that came back, and it seemed silly, but I remembered it so distinctly. We were walking along the power lines with our BB guns and our dogs, and there was these little, really pretty little frogs in these puddles, and everybody started shooting them with their BB guns, right? And then so they were looking at me, so I'm like, yeah, And we kept walking, and I was just and I did it because they expected me to do it, right? I wanted to be cool. And I remember as we were walking past, everybody else walked past and didn't even look. And I remember just looking in this puddle and seeing all these little dead bodies just floating. And I was just like, yeah, I did that, right? And, other times, where it would be with our wrist rocking, there's a rabbit, shoot the rabbit. I don't want to, I had a really sensitive heart. But I was like, if I don't do this, I'll be mocked. I'll be made fun of, I won't be seen as a man. I won't be tough. I won't be liked, And so little by little, I killed that part of myself. And I really locked that little, beautiful, sensitive child away in a closet. I said, sorry, I can't deal with you, bro. The world's a tough place. I gotta lock you away. And as I was doing this retreat, I finally just let that child out again. I said, you know what? I love you. You're beautiful. I love your sensitivity. I love your joy in the little things in life. I love your ability to weep with others. And I was honest, I was I don't give a shit what people think anymore, And it was such a freeing moment, I went to the tomb of St. Francis for 3 hours because we were doing this retreat in Assisi, and I remember I just wept for 3 hours. And I said, and I just went through my life, all the vows I'd made. I'll never back down. I'll never, do this. I will always be strong and I'll always be tough. I said, forget all that, right? All the things that people have said about me, I won't use all the names that, the lads used, you're this, that, anyways, you can figure it out, all the derogatory terms, calling me this thing and that thing, and I don't care what you think, right? What do I care what you think, right? Who are you to tell me who I am? My identity comes from the Lord, not from you. I don't care what you think, right? That's the freedom that the Lord wants for us, right? And that's the beauty of the sensitive heart, right? And so what's the gift of that? And so being sensitive is not weak. Jesus showed me his heart. It was so freaking sensitive. I'm like, wow. I mean, just a little bit of it, I'm like, that is so intense, Lord. The love that he feels, the passion that he feels for his people is so intense, right? He is so sensitive, right? And so having a sensitive heart isn't a problem. It's not a defect, right? Right? It's a gift, right? Because with that, we can enter into the heart of Jesus, right? And he had compassion for his people. That means he suffered with us. That means everything that we've suffered in our lives, Again, where was Jesus? He was right there with us. He felt everything we felt. He entered into it. He felt our pain. He took it on himself. Right? And so he invites us into that. Right? What is he inviting us into? He's inviting us into suffering with him. Right? And that's what was happening at the cross. Right? Who was at the cross? Mary, his mother. The language is always important. It says Mary was standing at the cross, right? She was standing. Why is that important? Because there was a couple of medieval images of Mary that were actually condemned by the church. One was the hysterical Mary, where she was like, "Oh, my soul!" And like running around screaming. Another one was like the swooning Mary, where she's like fainting. You know. The church on both of those was like, Right. No, she was standing. She was strong in that moment. But let me tell you what, being strong didn't mean she wasn't intensely suffering and weeping and just being pierced in her heart. Her heart was sensitive. In that moment, she was strengthening him. She was literally being strength for him, taking his pain onto her. It's almost as if we can take some of the pain from the person in a mystical way and say, I will take some of that for you, right? There's an expression that the Capuchin Franciscans had, which was eating the sins of the people. In other words, when the people were saying, like, I will do penance for you. I will suffer for you. I will take those things on to me for you because I love you. It was this embracing of and taking on things for others. And so our Lord does that for us. Our Lady was doing that for Jesus. The women at the cross were doing that. They were there just strengthening him by literally, I believe, give some of it to us, Lord. And the only disciple that was there was John, right? John was the sensitive one, right? He was the beloved disciple, right? Where was John at the Last Supper? He was literally just laying on the heart of Jesus on his breast, right? It's not the usual masculine position, right? John was just like, Jesus, I just want to, he's just literally like, I just want to stay here, right? He had that sensitive heart. And so he was the only one that was there. I want to suffer with my Lord, right? And for my Lord. And so the beauty of the sensitive heart, right? It's being able to take on, right? It's being able to console the heart of Jesus by suffering with him. And it's a gift that we can give to each other as well. Because when we have that sensitive heart, now, so it doesn't mean, again, just letting ourselves it's a strength in a sensitive heart, right? It doesn't mean just falling apart at every little thing that happens, because that's not necessarily helpful, you know. Everything happens, you know. Oh, they ran out of tea. Oh my God. I'm sorry. It's like, it's not helpful right now. We'll get some more tea. It's going to be grand. Right? But it's entering into, but it's when we're with somebody and we encounter their suffering, what can we do if we have the heart of Jesus, that sensitive heart, that beautiful, strong, sensitive heart? We can enter into their pain. We can allow the Lord, we can say, Jesus, how do you see this person? And Jesus can reveal that heart to us, and we can see that pain, and we can say, oh my gosh, so beautiful. And we can enter into that. And we can legitimately say, not just like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's terrible. I'll light a candle for you, you know. Which is beautiful. We can to light candles for each other. But it's not just words, but it's really an entering in. Like, I feel what you're talking about. I feel that. And I'm so sorry. You know, I'm so sorry. And that person knows then they're not alone. And you get me somewhat. They can see that, wow, you're feeling something of what I'm feeling. It's an opening our heart to like experience and to feel the feelings of this person. And when I'm praying with people, sometimes the Lord does that. And he just shows me this is what's going on, and I'm just like, literally sometimes I'm just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You know, like I'm seeing this, the hurt right now, the pain, and the Lord just loves you so much, and this is not his desire for you. I'm so sorry. Like it's entering into that because we need that, right? We need to know like that we're understood, that people feel us and understand us and get us. And that's the beauty of it, you know. They say, I don't know if it's still the case, but definitely it was traditionally the case, and I believe it still is, the most common last words, right, of a soldier on the battlefield as he's dying on the battlefield, right? In this moment of carnage and war, and he's with all of his, you know, his brothers in arms, that last moment, the most common word is mom, you know? Mom, right? That because they experienced in that love of the mother, that beautiful, feminine, sensitive heart, that love, right? I know it was left for her. Like, how often do we see that, you know, where the kid will go to the mother because they know somehow she's going to enter into that pain and make it better, you know, and receive it and understand it. And be strong in that moment to be able to say, it's okay, you know, it's okay. We're going to get through this together, you know, it's okay. And we just need to hear that. And so there's a beauty in that. And so a sensitive heart doesn't mean falling apart at the drop of a hat, but it means entering into others' suffering, right? It means a suffering with, right? Compassion, a suffering with, right? That's what the heart of Jesus was. Compassion, suffering heart, suffering for us. And that's what he's given, I think, in a unique and special and powerful way as a gift to women. And I think it's been misunderstood and honestly put down, especially nowadays. The message of the world is like, girl, you're a badass, you can kick ass, you can do it, you know. There's truth to that, yes. But that's not the strength and the beauty of, and the gift of the heart. It's more of like, if I have to fight, fine, I will, right? But that should be his job. Right? Tell him to get out there, you know. That was Adam's job from the beginning that he failed at, right, miserably, right? You know, Eve was being tempted by the devil. What's Adam doing, you know? He was there, well, you know. What were you doing, dude? You know, you're like literally, there's a big serpent talking to your wife. And leading her astray, and you're just like, well, I'm sorry, did I, you know, totally failed, right? His job at that moment would have been like, get stay. Do not talk to that thing. That is just speaking lies, right? Right? He should have stepped up in that moment, right? That's what his job was. And he didn't, right? He failed in that. And because of that, sin entered the world. So do not let the world tell you that there's something wrong with your sensitive heart. It's beautiful, and it's strong, and it uniquely reflects the heart of Jesus in a unique and beautiful way. A sensitive heart is a reflection of the heart of Jesus, right? And to enter into it, yes, it will mean at times it'll pierce us, and at times we'll weep, right? And that's okay. Okay. Sometimes people just need us to weep with them, right? They don't need us to fix the problem, right? Sometimes they just need somebody to listen to them and weep with them and to know that they're understood and they're heard and that they're loved and that you're actually suffering with them because you have compassion. And so, my sisters, your hearts are beautiful. And use those gifts that you have. The world needs them right now. The world is so suffering right now, so hurting right now. And it needs people to know, people who represent Jesus. And as Catholic Christians, we represent Jesus, to know that I am heard, that I'm loved, and that God hears me too. Because when we represent Jesus, it'll really say to them, God is with me. God hears me. I'm not alone. I'm not alone, right? And so my sisters, let us enter into that gift that we have of the sensitive heart. And use that gift for his people. And don't be afraid of it. and don't be afraid to weep, and to go forth and not care what people think, but to have that freedom to be the unique and beautiful heart and woman that God called you to be, because the world needs it now more than ever. Amen.